blessed me. I forgot to remind you to sing the notes, and you sang them anyway. That is so cool. What does it mean to be wise? The dictionary online at dictionary.com states that wisdom is having knowledge of what is true or right, coupled with just judgment as to action. So according to these particular wordsmiths, being wise is knowing right from wrong, truth from falsehood, and then being able to act on that knowledge, to act justly on what you determine is right. I invite you to think for a moment. Do you know someone in your life that you would consider to be wise? Would you say that folks describe you as a wise person? I don't know what you're thinking in your head, but when I am asked that question, I'm not thinking of anyone. It doesn't seem a word that we use often when talking about people that we know. I mean, we might describe someone as passionate or opinionated, discerning, or maybe overbearing with their opinions, caring, or a little condescending, but not necessarily wise. Wisdom might be considered to come with age, for example. But I don't think we treat our senior folk like one would treat a wise person, a sage. There used to be a time when our grandparents lived with us in large family homes where the family could hear their experiences and learn from them. But today, like those who are in prison, we prefer them hidden away somewhere, taken care of by others. Wise men and women are the stuff of fairy tales and legends, or Bible stories, like the one in Jesus' birth narrative that we read every Christmas. I'm not trying to say that wisdom is rare. I just don't imagine that we appreciate it when we hear it. Why? I think we live in a culture that tends to value our own opinions over that of people that we hear. And when we value our own thoughts over that of others, it makes listening to what others have to say a lot harder. And if someone is in a position of authority, in a position to be wise, like a leader of some kind, a CEO or a public figure, or dare I say it, a preacher, for example, the fear of being sued can cripple any wise course of action. Better we keep our mouths shut than risk offending anyone. I have to confess, I often fall into this category, so filled with self-doubt and so dependent on making others happy, I often cannot find the voice of wisdom within. I cannot hear her calling to me. Our world needs more wise people. When I think of the violence happening in so many places, in Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, our schools, our malls, our homes, it seems that wisdom, that knowledge of right from wrong coupled with right action is absent. You watch the news and it just seems like chaos reigns. How do we find wise leaders? How do we cultivate a listening spirit in our children, in our workplaces, in our schools, in our world? How can we be wise? The Bible teaches a lot about wisdom, about being wise. Our two lessons today are both considered part of the wisdom literature of the Bible. Wisdom literature is a form of ancient writings, not unique to our Bible, but the whole of the ancient world. And these writings teach about divinity and virtue. They often call on the natural world to make their points very plain. One could say that these books are earthy. These writings are grounded in common sense. Our first lesson, actually our second lesson, is the best example in the Bible, the book of Proverbs. The very first chapter explains its purpose as following. If you look at the very first chapter in Proverbs, before the part that I read this morning, it says, this book is for gaining instruction in wise dealing, righteousness, justice, and equity. Except for a few little connected verses here and there, like the story that I read about wisdom crying in the streets, the entire book is mostly made up of little wise and pithy sayings. Whoever heeds instruction is on the path to life, but one who rejects a rebuke has gone astray. Gaining knowledge, fearing God, and learning from your mistakes are taught over and over with earthy topics like disciplining your children, avoiding strong drink, staying away from adultery, spending your money wisely. It's all there in the book of Proverbs. You should read it. Our passage today, however, is not just unique in the book of Proverbs, but unique in the whole of Scripture. It's interesting because wisdom is personified. The word wisdom is feminine in both the Greek hakmot the Hebrew hakmot and the Greek Sophia. Sophia, if you're here, your name is wise. Yes, I see you. That's right. Both of those words are feminine in the languages from which they came. So it makes sense that if you're going to personify wisdom, it's going to be a her. It's an important example of an attribute of God from the Bible that uses female pronouns, and it makes me very happy. Many scholars believe that wisdom as described here and the actions that they portray in this passage are like that of the Holy Spirit. So many people read this as the Holy Spirit calling you in the streets. And since I believe the Holy Spirit is God's acting in our lives right now, God's calling of us each individually, the idea of wisdom crying in the streets for the people to listen to her sounds like something the Holy Spirit would do. So I'm on board. In this passage, wisdom, Holy Spirit, is madder than mad. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? And look where she's calling out to people. She's calling out in the public spaces, the squares, the busiest street corners, the gates of the city. It's not because she wants to reach the most people, although that would make perfect sense. It's because wisdom is a public thing. Wisdom shows up where people live their lives every day. Is anyone listening to me? She says. Give heed to what I say. And then, I'll be honest, I'm not an editor of the Bible, but I think if I were writing this, I might have changed a few things. For example, that the writer takes her personified vision of wisdom a little too far. Because I have called and you have refused, I will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when panic strikes you like a storm. Wisdom, chill out a little bit. Wow. To me, this is a perfect example of humans' take on God. Because we have other teachings that say God loves a repentant heart, that God forgives us when we ask with sincere hearts. The language in this chapter is like something we would say, not necessarily something that I believe God would say. Isn't that a human reaction? Ha ha ha, nanny nanny boo boo, I told you so, you jerk. That's what you get for not listening to me. Somehow I just don't think that's how God works. But I wisdom is calling us. And I do believe that few people take the time to hear her voice. And I don't think it's because they can't. I think it's because they don't know how. And nowhere is wisdom harder to hear than in our public spaces, right? With advertisements telling us that buying this hair color will make you beautiful and wearing this watch makes you just like George Clooney. Aside from these neon signs, there's crazy drivers and honking horns and people trying to sell you something. And I'm not just stating the obvious here, is that while all this is happening, we have a phone glued to our ears or earbuds in, listening to loud, blaring music. All these conflicting messages dull our ears with constant noise. Where do we find the space to hear wisdom calling? More importantly, how do we learn to hear it? Like a baby that can pick out mom's voice among all the other sounds, we can learn to listen. How? That's a good question. Bear with me a minute. I want to turn to our second one. Well, first one, really. The book of James, okay? It's the only piece of wisdom literature in the New Testament. I mean, it's a letter, like any of the other books around it, but the writer uses so much natural metaphor in making the teachings known, and the topics are so earthy, it reads much like Proverbs. This passage offers us the important lesson of how to hear the voice of wisdom, namely, bide your tongue. Note that I did not say bite your tongue. I said bide your tongue. To bide means to wait. And biding your tongue is simply thinking before you speak. You would think that James would tell us just to be silent, the way he goes on and on about how evil the tongue is, right? Our tongues, as represented here, are lit by the very fires of hell, according to James. They're like tiny rudders that turn large ships in the direction that the pilot gives. And just a tiny shift in direction, and whoa, you might find yourself in Rwanda while you're aiming for right aim. They're small but mighty, mighty to do good and mighty to do ill. They're like a tiny fire that sets a forest ablaze. Our tongues are wilder than wild animals, untamable. James is not a fan. And he has good reason, I think. And it's not just because our tongues can get us into trouble when we're not using the proper filters. Okay, you know what I mean. When you accidentally say a truth that might have been better left unsaid, that happens all the time, especially to me, as I get older, unfortunately. And it's frustrating, but as long as you're on top of it, you can repair the damage. What James is upset about is when we use our lips for praising God and then proceed to curse our neighbor. When our mouths are spouting fresh water in one room and then sewage water in the next. We need to be very careful when we vent our spleens about folks we know. I mentioned this the last time I preached. Nothing does as much damage to a person's faith or to a church than when one sees a fellow Christian say one thing in one place, say and do something else that disagrees in another. As James reminds us, it's just as it's not natural for a fig tree to produce olives, it is not right for a person who loves God to curse his or her neighbor. It's hypocrisy, and it's deadly. Deadly to a soul, deadly to a church, and especially deadly for a child. That first verse of James's reading is a warning about becoming a teacher that I told you about. Isn't it interesting when a lectionary passage intersects with our teacher commissioning. Not many of you should become teachers, he writes. But he might very well have added, not many of you should become mothers and fathers. Not many of you should drive cars. Not many of you should keep a checkbook or have a credit card. However, his point is that teachers, because they pass on this sacred knowledge of right and wrong, of how to live life as a child of God, these teachers need to be very careful. We also believe God calls us to teach. That some of us just have a gift with children. James is worried about what a teacher might say, but what if the teacher was willing to learn? What if that troubled kid in class had something to teach the teacher? What if that pastor might learn while leading Bible study? What if a CEO might learn something from the lowly accountant in his office or her office? Who are those people in your life? Are you willing to hear wisdom speak through them? If we want to hear wisdom crying out from the squares and busy street corners, we need to be open to the fact that she just might be the homeless person lying in the doorway. She just might be the 2-year-old with jelly stains on his face whose shoes are untied. She just might be the refugee arriving by bus in your community. The trick to being wise is being willing to listen. Be willing to get ourselves, our egos, out of the way and see those around us. I mean, truly seeing them and then listening to what they might have to say to us. Is wisdom being heard today? Yes. I heard wisdom when I saw the footage of folks in Germany cheering a busload of refugees arriving in their town. It took my breath away. I couldn't help asking myself, would that happen here? They heard wisdom calling, and they listened. And I heard many tales this past week as we remembered 9/11. Tales of countless people who selflessly helped rescue those who were trapped in the World Trade Towers that day, and even those who gave their lives for the sake of a stranger. Wisdom is calling, friends. It's time to turn down the distractions, look around, and listen. Amen.